Wherever you look across these borders or these 4 different parts of Kurdistan, it's always the same patterns: denial, violence, conditional rights. Being stateless means you're essentially negotiating for the same rights that other people are born with. Earlier this year, between January 6th to January 8th, 140,000 to an estimated 155,000 people had to flee their homes due to violent conflict in the area of Rojava or northern Syria. But you see, for the Kurdish people, this is not a one-off incident. Post the Gulf War, nearly 1 million Kurds to 1.5 million Kurds fled in what became known in Kurdish culture as Iraq and Syria, which literally translates to the running. To understand why Kurds keep having these struggles and these geopolitical issues and discrimination within the region, we need to go back to the context of Kurdistan and why we're here. For those of you that don't know, there are about 40 to 55 million Kurds worldwide. That makes us the largest ethnic group on this planet without a country. So how can so many people not have their own nation? I mean, there are plenty of nations all over the world with drastically smaller populations who are also much less diverse. Not that that has to do with anything, but it brings me on to my next point. With Kurdish, we have many dialects. We have many types of religions. For example, within Kurdistan, you can speak Kurmanji, Sorani, Badini, and much more. You could be Sunni, Yazidi, Christian, Jewish, Shia. So when you look at this and this large tapestry of culture and heritage, how did our people not end up with a state? To understand this, we have to go back to the early 1900s. In 1916, there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France, which divided the Ottoman Middle East secretly, and Kurds were not included. Now, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, although when you look at it, essentially what they drew up ended up being the borders, there were 2 other treaties after that. So first there was the Treaty of Severus. This one did actually promise Kurds a potential state. And the third one was the Treaty of Lausanne, which replaced the Treaty of Severus, but this one completely eliminated the idea of a Kurdish state. To make things clear for everybody, Bakur is north, which is in Turkey. Bashur is south, which is in Iraq. Rojava is east, which is in Iran. And Rojava is west, which is in Syria. Now, these borders were drawn without the Kurds, but ever since they have been enforced on the Kurds. When we look at the conflicts that the Kurds have had and still face to this day, we literally need to go back to 1937, the first massacre that involved Kurdish people, innocents essentially, people who were a product of these borders that were drawn without them. Between 1937 to 1938, an orchestrated attack by the Turkish state under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was one of the worst incidences in our history. Villages destroyed, mass killings, forced displacement. And then we go to Halabja in 1988, chemical weapons used on civilians. This was a part of Saddam Hussein's Anfal jihad. Thousands killed in minutes. And if you have the stomach for it, go online and kind of look at the footage. These were not just strategies, these were state-led campaigns against the Kurdish people. And as we're going to discover today, again, even right now, January 2026, there is another state-led attack on the Kurdish people. When I speak to Middle Easterns who sometimes are opposed to the idea of Kurdistan, it kind of baffles my mind because pretty much every Middle Eastern nation has wanted independence from these Western powers and really haven't agreed with the drawn borders for the most part. We have Turkey in 1923, Saudi Arabia in 1932, Iraq in 1932, Lebanon in 43, Syria in 46, Jordan in 46, Kuwait in 61. I could literally keep going. But for some reason, the idea of not being independent, not having your state, is okay for the Kurds, but absolute blasphemy for the rest of the Middle East. Even for nations like Iraq and Saudi Arabia, who actually had strong ties to the British in the early 1900s, even they wanted their independence. Now, geopolitics is a messy game, but simply put, when these nations either cooperated or fought, they got their rights. When Kurds cooperated with global powers, they were never rewarded with statehood. When I look at these lines in the sand and hear some of the blasphemy that comes out of people's mouths, it literally makes me think some of you have never read books like Lines in the Sand by James Barr, which perfectly articulates how the British and French, with a few global leaders in the Middle East, draw up these borders with no consideration except for themselves and how they could gain most power. One of the reasons I want to talk about political figures in the Middle East is that, genuinely speaking, they are some of the biggest problems. It's often bad leaderships that make people want to say to someone like me, oh, where is Kurdistan? For example, let's talk about somewhere in Kurdistan, actually. Let's talk about Kirkuk, right? Historically, Kirkuk has always been a very mixed city, with Kurds, Arabs, Turks, Assyrians, all of these people managing to live peacefully amongst each other. In the 1970s and 80s, Saddam Hussein implemented Arabization policies, right? Forced displacement of Kurds and Turks at the time, resettled Arabs from other regions into Kirkuk, and rewarded local administrations to favour the Arabs. Now, this artificially changed demographic created long-term ethical tensions. Today, disputes over control of oil and identity in Kirkuk are directly linked to these policies. Many Kurds see this as a disruption of centuries of coexistence. I'm not saying they were always peaceful in that era, but if you met someone from Kirkuk in that time, not only did they probably speak Arabic and Kurdish and Turkish, but they also lived amongst each other. They worked with one another. They traded with one another. And then comes a regime by Saddam Hussein who is completely anti-Kurdish. And we have what we have today in Kirkuk. Let's briefly go back to 1991. I referred to it at the beginning of the podcast when I said millions of Kurds were displaced, but let's talk about why and who were the key players in these issues. Now, stay with me, we actually have quite a bit to get through. After the Gulf War in 1991, Kurds in northern Iraq, or Bashur, Kurdistan, wanted to stand up against the regime led by Saddam Hussein. The Iraqi state was actually quite weakened, and for Kurds, they believed this was a rare opening after decades of repression. Kurds from all over Bashur were ready, and they were under two main leaders. So, in Hawler, known as Erbil, or Dahok, they were led by Barzani, and in Slemani, they were led by Talabani. And there were thousands of other Peshmergas defending their towns and villages ready to take up this cause. Kurds believed the United States and coalition forces would intervene or at least protect civilians. And that support did not come. And the reason I'm giving you this context is because right now, in Rojava, that support is not coming. After this uprising, Saddam responded with force. The army crushed the uprising, bombed civilians, and targeted Kurdish populations worse than ever. The result was mass panic and displacement. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds fled into the mountains towards Turkish areas, Iranian borders. Many died from cold, hunger, illness. Entire families were left exposed. Only after the international media showed the scale of disaster, that's when there was a response. Eventually, in my opinion, a bit too late, there was a no-fly zone imposed in northern Iraq, offering small protection, but honestly, it came after an enormous loss of life. Earlier today, as I was just doing my final little chapter of the podcast, I came across an article by Dr. Bamonuri, who many of you know has been on this podcast. He wrote something very important. He wrote it for the Armagi, who, by the way, if you haven't heard of them, I recommend you check out their articles. They're doing great work. But let me just quote this paragraph from Dr. Nouri. This exposure has deep roots. The modern Middle East was shaped by imperial design, not self-determination. The post-World War I settlement crystallized in the logic of Sykes-Picot, acknowledged Kurdish existence while denying Kurdish sovereignty. Borders were drawn for manageability, not justice. Throughout the 20th century, Kurdish aspirations were alternately encouraged and abandoned. During the Cold War, Kurdish movements were supported when useful and discarded when inconvenient. United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger famously captured this realism by implying that foreign policy is not about charity, a principle that Kurds have had to pay for repeatedly. So, that's one example of betrayal. Let's talk about modern-day Rojava in January 2026. If we slightly go back a bit, when it was the biggest threat in the world and in the Middle East, the unlikely heroes were the Syrian Democratic Forces or the Kurdish freedom fighters. Now, the world clapped and cheered us on and supported. But now, as they actually face huge pressures, our allies then are no longer our allies. You have to look at this geopolitically. America is the strongest nation in the world, and along with Russia and China, they are top three. When the Syrian civil war first broke out, Bashar chose his side, Bashar al-Assad, the former leader of Syria. He chose Russia, right? There was great Russian influence within Syria. America looked at this and said, hold on, there's a war in the Middle East, and we're not getting a piece of this pie. So what do? Well, it only makes sense. The only side that we can align with is the SDF, and we can look like heroes doing it, which is what they did. They came in, they did support on the ground, they did offer a lot of weapons to the SDF, and they offered a lot of training, and then they left. And as soon as they left, that was already a betrayal. If we're being honest, if we draw our minds back to the first time that America actually left Syria, Turkey started shelling Kurdish populations and pushing the SDF further and further back. As I've said many times before, geopolitics is a game of chess. And at that time, America really only had one piece, which was the SDF. And now it has more than one piece, so it can ignore the SDF. But in order to understand how America went from only supporting the SDF in Syria to supporting the Syrian government as a whole, we need a bit of context. When Bashar al-Assad fell on the 8th of December 2024, this was a disaster for him and he flew to Moscow, but it was also a disaster for Russia. Now they don't have the influence that they once did in Syria. So now countries like America get to kind of dictate what happens. Contrary to mainstream media outlets, I'm telling you, and many other educated people will tell you, that Ahmed al-Shahra right now is nothing more than a geopolitical piece for both Turkey and America. This man was literally a wanted like 2 years ago. There was a bounty on his head. He had links to Al-Qaeda, and now he's leading Syria. And listen, for all of the issues right now, that doesn't stop the significance of Syria in the Middle East or in history. Syria, Damascus, one of the greatest nations in the Middle East, historically relevant in every type of era in the Middle East, relevant to Islam, relevant to Christianity. This once great nation is literally being led by a terrorist. And you cannot make that up. I often, in the last week or two, have been saying that to some of my friends who are not that familiar with Middle Eastern politics, and they are absolutely baffled. They genuinely don't believe me. I literally have to go on Google and be like, there he is. This is what he used to do, and this is what he does now. This man went from being a wanted terrorist to meetings in the White House and being one of the most important allies in the Middle East to Washington. Honestly, from an unbiased perspective, this is just disappointing. Nobody wins. Like, who wins? The Kurds don't win. The Syrian people don't win. I guess the only people that do win are Turkey, America, and I guess leaders, people who are there for the wrong reasons. With the SDF no longer seeming useful to Western powers or to anyone in the Middle East, Ahmed al-Shahra drew up a 14-point plan which he wants the SDF to agree to. Many SDF leaders, including General Mazloum, have been negotiating in Damascus recently over the past few days. And currently, as I'm recording right now, it is January 23rd, and we are on day 3 of the ceasefire. But I really, really want to go over this with you guys. It's 14 points, and I think as I read them out to you, or basically cover most of it, you'll kind of understand why the Kurds don't want it and are so reluctant. In fact, personally, I'll tell you this right now. That 14-point deal is nothing more than an insult. Check this out. So, first one, obvious. A full ceasefire between the Syrian forces and the SDF makes sense. Handover of SDF-controlled territory and administrations to the Syrian state. Now, that has happened, by the way. The SDF have been pushed back, but already we have seen violations. Already, some of these militia groups which are acting under the Syrian state have let out thousands of prisoners. Now, when the media reports on it, they say, oh, the SDF are saying it's Syria and the Syria are saying it's the SDF. Why would the SDF let out their enemies? The same ISIS fighters that are responsible for so many lives in that region that were literally trying to kill the SDF, why would we release them? It's not us. It's the militia groups. This Syrian army has so many proxies. If you have time, just go online and look at some of the viral videos. Some of these people that are coming into what were SDF strongholds and marching under the Syrian banner or the Syrian state, you can literally see their badges. And some of them literally say, ISIS is back, my people. Right? And this took what? 24 hours after the SDF left? It is what it is. And it's creating a bigger problem in the Middle East because some of those prisons are no longer safe. In fact, America has already said that it's going to transport thousands of these ISIS prisoners to more safe prisons in Iraq, which directly takes us back into Iraq. Another thing, something else that they want, which is very insulting, is the dissolution of the SDF as an independent force with fighters integrating individually into the Syrian army and security services. And wait, according to Ahmed al-Shahra, this is where it gets good. He wants to say to the Kurdish people, we will start recognizing your rights, okay? But only within fully centralized Syrian control. So they want the restoration of Syrian citizenship to Kurds who were previously stripped of it, okay? Permission for the Kurdish language to be taught in schools, official recognition of Kurdish culture and identity, recognition of Kurdish cultural events such as Nowruz, Kurdish participation in local and national government institutions, legal protections or amnesty for SDF members who comply, transfer of oil fields, borders, and key infrastructure to state control. I'm going to stop you there. What is that? That is like point number 10 or 11. That's the only one that makes sense. Like, honestly, geopolitically speaking, right? Not being biased as a Kurd, the only thing here that actually makes sense is that they want the transfer of the oil fields and the infrastructure. Yeah, I get it. That actually does make sense. Let me just finish it off though before I really go on my rant. Agreement on timeline and conditions for implementation, vague, no one even knows what that means, and full affirmation of Syrian state sovereignty over all territory and armed forces. Listen, I'm from Bashur, I'm from Slemani. I moved to the UK, to Manchester when I was 5. I now hold a British passport. These things are normal, everyday rights. Telling me that you recognize my people is an everyday right, which everybody wants. Now, I get it. Britain hasn't come to me and said, oh, we officially recognize Nowruz as a national holiday. But there's a difference. There are 2 to 2.5 million Kurds in Syria. On top of that, for the last decade, they've been getting rid of the largest threat in Syria. Some would say Bashar was a bigger threat. But at the end of the day, The Kurds were a big reason as to why there was any hope in that country over what's going on in the civil war. And yet, your idea of bringing the SDF to the table is to say, oh, here's the bare minimum. Here's the bare minimum that every person in this world should actually have. Here is the citizenship which you never should have been stripped from. I'll put it this way. Citizenship, language, and culture are being offered as bargaining chips in exchange for surrendering autonomy, land, and self-defense. Look, many of us, including myself, we think this is political theatre, okay? This deal is not designed for Kurds, or with any of our values in mind. Just because you slap no rows onto the deal and say, oh, you can have a few days off, that's not for us, right? This deal is designed to absorb, weaken, and control them. And as I said earlier, it's an insult. Plus, what are the SDF meant to do? You've already weakened them. They've lost their strongest allies in the West through abandonment. And Syria is putting pressure on them as well. And then you have Turkey putting pressure on them. So you're basically saying to the SDF, either comply, lose all of your dignity, or we will literally take you out by force. In a couple of weeks already, we've seen the mass chaos that is ensued in Syria. In Taqba, a statue of a female SDF fighter was forcefully taken down. Now, this was not just a loss for the SDF. This was a loss for democracy in Syria. This was a loss for feminism in Syria. These militia groups, they're completely inhumane. And I know some people like to say things like, all is fair in love and war. But mate, there's got to be some level of decency. There was a man who went viral only a few days ago. He had taken the braids of a female SDF fighter and he was gloating with it online, right? And he was saying, look, I've got the hair of this pig. It's sad to even talk about these things. But the resilience that the Kurdish people show constantly. I'll tell you what the Kurdish girls did. They all started a trend. They all started braiding their hair. And it was all over social media. And that same man, by the way, under social media pressure, this power of social media, I think about 2 days later, he came out and he said, oh, this was fake hair. This wasn't real hair. And I'm really sorry. Because bear in mind as well, these proxies and militia groups right now are acting on behalf of the Syrian state. And essentially, they've made them look bad as well, while they're trying to look like they're the good guys and they're bringing the SDF to the table. I think something else that's really sad about this man as well is he actually has 5 daughters. A man with 5 daughters cut the hair of a freedom fighter, SDF member, and was gloating with it like it was a trophy. But I guess the reason why for someone like him, he can have 5 daughters and not worry that something like this would happen to his kids is because the only type of men that would do things like that are men like him who are a part of these proxies and militia groups who go around inhumanely innocents. This isn't the Genghis Khan era. This isn't the Celts. You don't just take a part of your enemy and gloat it around. Or maybe I'm naive. I don't know, but it's genuinely hard to express these words. But if my people are fighting in Rojava, I have no problem sitting here comfortably recording a podcast. And sometimes, honestly, I've been thinking about this a lot. The only difference between some of these Kurds that are suffering right now and me is the fact that my family fled to England. You know, I could have easily been a kid in Rojava. I get it, I'm from Bashur, I'm not from the Syrian regions, but, you know, as Kurds, when one of us hurts, we all do, genuinely. And no better example than this. Mass numbers of civilians, volunteers, Peshmergas from Bashur and from Bakur have been getting in those coaches and have been going straight to Rojava. And I'm going to put the videos in. It's one of the most beautiful forms of unification. And even in Rojava, everywhere you go, the Kurds are supporting one another. The protests in Holid, in Slemani, in Duhok, in outside of Kurdistan, in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Manchester, in London. We as Kurds have never been more united. Wherever you look across these borders or these 4 different parts of Kurdistan, it's always the same patterns: denial, violence, conditional rights. Being stateless means you're essentially negotiating for the same rights that other people are born with. We might not have Kurdistan on a map, right? Just ironic, because before these agreements, Kurdistan is very visible on a lot of historical maps. We didn't just inhabit a few places of land and decided to call it Kurdistan. Kurdistan is a place. My people have been there for centuries. The citadel in Erbil is the oldest inhabited place on this planet. My favorite form of resistance that Kurdistan is showing right now is that people from Bakur, Bashur, and Rojava are coming in numbers, in the thousands, in buses, in coaches, in their cars, and they're crossing the border and they're showing solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Rojava. And truly, the Kurds have genuinely never been more united, at least not in my lifetime that I can remember. It's just sad that it came under these circumstances. As I said, millions of us without a homeland, millions of us without a state, but we will always be one, and we all share the same struggles of Kurdistan, no matter where we are. All 4 parts of Kurdistan burn as one. And let me tell you something. The truth is, for us Kurds, this is a sad reality that we've always known and we've actually lived by. For us Kurdish people, there are no friends but the mountains. Once again, the world has proven that for us. But another interesting thing about us Kurds is we're not that good at maths. Because for us, 2 + 2 always equals 1. This is a famous quote from Qazi Muhammad. 2 + 2 is not 4, it is 1, because all 4 parts of Kurdistan are 1. If I could just end on something for you, or something very close to my heart, the greatest song that I think the Kurds have ever written is a song called Her Kurdabin. If anything, it's a national anthem, and it was written by Ibrahim Ahmed. I'm gonna say some of it to you, and then I'll translate it for you, and you'll understand why it means so much to me. It goes as follows. Na Arabim, na Iranim, na Turkiye ki Shakhstanim, nek her min khom bes mejush ale ke Kurdum o Kurdistanim. Which translates to, I'm not Arab, I'm not Iranian, I'm not a mountainous Turk. Not just me, but history speaks that I am Kurd and I am Kurdistani. Divided by borders, united as a people, we stand as one, we march as one, and we sing as one. I hope this has been informative for those of you that were not familiar with the struggle. I hope my Kurdish people enjoyed this as well. Until the next time, my people, her biji Kurdu Kurdistan. Take care.